Hello friends, welcome back. This video is about using materials in Godot. If you're not familiar with materials and shaders, I'd highly recommend watching at least the previous video first, as we're going to build on that knowledge now. So in general game dev parlance, when we talk about materials, we are usually talking about visual materials. So the bundle of properties that changes how an object looks, how it interacts with light, the engine's physics, and determines its rendered result. So what it ends up looking like on the screen. In Godot, we can see this at work in our meshes, specifically in our visual instances. So if you've ever dragged a texture onto a primitive mesh like this, you'll see it automatically generates a standard material in this slot right here. But if we poke around a little, we can see that there are also lots of other slots for materials. In fact, there's 4 places that we can assign a material. You can see that if I put this same material in any of the slots, the result is the same. So what's the difference? Let's bring in a more complex example. So this little bee model right here. You can see that it has a few different colors and they appear here marked as surface material. And each material is being applied to different parts of the mesh. So rather than one homogeneous skin, like we saw with our previous primitive shape, these colors are being applied to specific surface polygons of the mesh. So I actually attached these in Blender when I was adapting this model, and they are now appearing in Godot on import. So when we import a model like this into Godot, we can't actually change the imported properties. Those just come with the model, but we can override them. So that's the whole point of this slot. And in this case, you can see that there is a slot for each material. If there's just one material, you'll only see one slot. So in this way, we can have scenes or instances based on a mesh that have different surface materials that are overridden. So we can change one or all of them. So let's reset and have a look at a different slot. So scrolling down to its geometry properties. So in here, we also have a material override. But unlike before, when we could specify materials being applied to different parts of the surface, this one is applied to the entire mesh. So we could use this slot if we want to recolor the whole mesh, or if we don't care about multiple slots and we just want one material. In those cases, it's not really going to matter where you apply your material. And finally, we have this overlay slot. So this is kind of similar to the previous one in that it does affect the entire mesh, again, all of the geometry, but instead of replacing or overriding all of the other surface materials, it renders this one in addition to all of the others, so as an overlay. Intuitively, this is a little bit hard to grasp, so let's go through some examples with shaders to help our understanding. So how do we apply shaders to our models? So remember, materials are just a bundle of parameters, whereas a shader is what actually runs on the GPU and actually does the work of rendering the image to the screen. Even if you didn't realize it, this standard material actually uses a built-in shader. So this is going to be a PBR or physics-based rendering shader, and it's going to consider all of its parameters here. You can see that there are also some optional ones. And yes, as a default, this is the material that is going to be used to render the object, and this is the shader. But if we don't care about any of these properties, then we don't need that shader in particular, or the material, which defines it, either. We can replace all of it with our own shader material, and then define all of the properties ourselves. A great place to start investigating this, by the way, if you're not super familiar with writing shader code yourself, is godotshaders.com. So this is a community-driven library of free shaders that you can use in your game. So there's lots of different kinds of shaders here: spatial, canvas item, fog, and so on. These reflect the different kinds of materials that we can replace. And remember, those have their own sort of distinct requirements and properties. So in this case, since we are looking at 3D objects and visual instances, we are going to want what is called spatial shaders. So let's say we want to use this one right here. So a hologram shader. Where do we put this? What material do we overwrite? Well, in this case, we want it to transform the whole model, not just one of the colors. So we wouldn't want to put it on just one of the surface material slots. We'll want to use the geometry section override. And then that's going to be applied to the whole model. So it's going to replace everything that was colored and use the shader instead and the shader parameters to render the model. So let's copy that across, paste in the shader. And then you can see we get this little hologram. So what about this one? An item highlight. If we use the same process as last time and put it in the override slot, this is what we get. So you can see it's overriding the whole model and we just get the effect. And that's not what we want. We want the highlight to appear above the model. So this is the time where we want to use the overlay because it's going to be rendered in addition to all of our other materials. So we're going to keep all of the base materials underneath and then render something as an overlay. So it's worth pointing out as well that you can actually apply multiple materials or shaders using multiple render pass slots right here. In the previous case though, we can't do that because we have multiple surface materials and are not using a material override. So essentially there's just not a first pass to add to. We can't add a second pass. But other models might be configured that way and you can absolutely use that instead. So I hope this tutorial gives you a bit of an overview to get started with materials and shaders in Godot. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you next time.